Good morning. Before I begin, I'd actually like to ask, if I may, how many people are here because they themselves are dealing with a chronic illness? Lots of you. And how many are here because you know someone, perhaps someone very close to you, who's dealing with a chronic illness? Yeah. Well, I just want you to know that I do know this journey. I came to my work because my own daughter was ill for 5 years. She missed pretty much all of high school and most of 8th grade with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I know how hard it is to hear some of the medical news you get. And most of all, I know how hard it is to hold on to hope when there don't seem to be any good answers. So I'm happy to report that my daughter just graduated from college and she's now flying around the country doing very exciting, strenuous work, working all hours. So she has recovered, which was, as I said, my reason to get into the work that I do. So I teach a 3-day training program called the Lightening process, and it's helped many people, thousands of people around the world, recover from their health from chronic illness. But I'm going to start, if I may, telling a story that's a little bit on me, because it shows that sometimes we're a bit slow to recognize the infinite possibility of healing. So the short version of the story is that when I was quite young, about 8 or 9 years old, and apparently a tomboy who did not believe in school rules, I fell out of a tree, very unceremoniously. And I broke my arm very badly. I sheared off the top of the humerus bone here, which was not the least bit humorous, and had several surgeries. It was pinned, it was up in the air in various casts and things for many, many years. And as a result of that, I had a shoulder that never was quite the same. And over the course of the intervening decades, and there have been a few of those, it deteriorated further. So there were many things I couldn't do, didn't have range. My whole body had adjusted to this part of my anatomy that didn't work so well, and I had a lot of pain. But I was very used to it. It was like sort of the lobster in the pot getting to boiling. This happened over such a gradual period of time, I barely noticed it. And to be honest, I hardly gave it any attention. Until 3 years ago, I fell, spectacularly, I may say, and I put this arm out to take the full brunt of the fall. Now, for a shoulder that was as suboptimal as mine was, that was a huge, huge fall. So in the emergency room, after various scans and x-rays and so on, these are the words I heard. I remember it word for word. "We've never seen a shoulder like this. We don't know if it's broken or dislocated, or both. There's nothing we can do for you. You're going to have to see the top shoulder specialist." So I dutifully went and was told in no uncertain terms that the only answer for me, if I wanted to have any movement in this arm, and if I wanted to be pain-free, the only answer was to have rather drastic surgery of an reverse shoulder replacement known as last resort shoulder replacement, which I didn't think sounded very appealing. Nevertheless, I signed up because I thought there's nothing else to do. Otherwise, I'm going to have what I had then, which was this completely useless arm that hurt a whole lot. Then, you'll be glad to hear, I remembered something. I remembered that I had these amazing tools that I had been teaching to others. What would it be like, I thought, to apply these tools to my situation? So I went back to the physical therapist that I'd worked with off and on for years and said, "What do you think?" She said, "I'm not sure." By the way, any medical person who knew this story thought I was slightly insane, maybe a lot. But I persevered. So over the course of, I don't know how many months, even when I somehow snapped my biceps tendon in the same arm, which was not a particularly good move, since one of the issues, one of the many, was that this bone didn't want to stay seated in the joint. I now have an arm that works better than it's worked for decades. Not only that, but I have almost full range, about as much range as I had after I fell out of the tree, and I am completely pain-free. even more significant is that I used to hold my body somewhat like this. People said it looked like you had a wounded wing, and it'd be like this. And if you notice, I'm completely square now. Same physical therapist, drastic injury, but this time I decide to use the tools I have, which are to use mind and body together to access all the healing power we have. So it's limitless what we can do when we marshal all the resources that we have. And one of our favorite images in the lightning process is the yellow rubber duck. And I'll tell you why. Yellow rubber ducks are designed to do one thing, other than give great delight in a children's bath. They float. They float supremely well. They are buoyant and they are resilient, just like the human body, mind, and spirit, which are designed to heal. So in the lightning process, one of the things we look at when people are dealing with chronic conditions is what's in the way of that natural healing process. Why in this particular case is the body not healing from an injury that maybe 2 years ago would have been one that was recovered from? So one of the things that we look at particularly is the fight or flight response. I'm sure you've all heard of that. We actually talk about this as the physical emergency response because of the amazing impact the fight or flight response has throughout our entire body. It pretty much hijacks our entire nervous system and creates all kinds of changes throughout the body. So it was designed for a time when there were wild animals running around, when we needed to have that superhuman capacity to escape or to fight, to get out of danger. And what it allows us to do is to turn on that amazing sympathetic nervous system that transmits all kinds of messages throughout our body, throughout our nervous system, so that we can access an enormous amount of energy and power to do things that we normally would not be able to do. The problem with that is that in today's world, there aren't too many tigers wandering around, but there are an awful lot of stresses, an awful lot of things in our daily lives, and perhaps in our histories, and perhaps in the way we learn to be in the world, that produce that same level of stress. And that stress is disrupting our autonomic systems. It's producing pain. It's accessing and triggering those pain pathways. And when you think about pain, I think everybody probably understands here that while pain is experienced excruciatingly sometimes in various parts of the body, it is actually produced in the brain. And we know this in part because people who have phantom limbs and they've lost a leg, say, will have terrible, terrible pain experiences from the very part of their body that doesn't even exist. It's being produced in the brain. And there's all kinds of body chemistry that explains all that. I'm not sure it'd be particularly useful to go into it. But the more these pain pathways are triggered, the stronger they get. And then the entire nervous system gets into a loop of triggering pain pathways when actually there's no need. As a doctor said at a conference in San Jose recently, the tissue is not the issue. It's what is the nervous system doing? What is the communication between the brain and the body doing? And very particularly, how is the brain responding to the information that it has? And then what messages is it sending out? So in addition to that, when the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, is switched on, our beautiful healing system, the parasympathetic nervous system, is in the off position. It's not needed when we're fighting tigers or running away from tigers. So our natural healing, rest and restore system is shut down. And when this is happening over long, extended periods of time, and when the brain gets stuck in this loop of responding as though there's an emergency happening all the time, this dysfunction will be profoundly changing how our bodies are operating. So, what creates a stress response? What fires it up? Lots of things. And to what Philip said, it's a group of one. Each individual is so unique. And while there are certain patterns that we see, each person has their own way of life, their own way of thinking that might be playing a part in the stress response that they're feeling. So it nearly always begins with some kind of injury, some kind of illness, or maybe a combination, or maybe perhaps just a prolonged stressful period in somebody's life. That's stressful. We're then told things. We go to doctors and are asking for help, which we don't necessarily get. That's stressful. We're not able to be in our lives the way we'd like to be. That's stressful. We start to think about our futures in a different way. That's stressful. So already we've got a stress loop starting. But then let's add to that. What about our environment? What about the environment we grew up in? What about our situation at home? What about our situation at school, if we're going to school? What about our thoughts? So it's estimated that we have, and there's a wide swing here, anywhere between 40 and 100,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot of thoughts. So the question is, what's the quality of those thoughts? What are we thinking to ourselves? And many of us are not thinking very positively, and our thoughts are constantly producing the same kind of despair about our situation. Beliefs are very important. I'll talk about them in a little bit too. How hopeful are we feeling? What beliefs do we have about what's possible for us in our lives? What do we believe we deserve in our lives? All of these things play a part. And then lack of hope. We've talked about that. Hope is essential to the healing process. I just heard from a client in New York who's going to come to Portland, and just as a result of engaging with me and talking about the lightening process and starting to think about his future differently, he tells me that he is feeling infinitely better, both in his spirit and his mind, but also in his body, because they're all related. And then we look at language. Language is very important. It is our communication means. While we talk to others all the time, we're also talking to ourselves. So what are we saying? Generally, the world tends to speak in the language of what we don't want. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that. We tend to say, I don't want this, and we think we're being positive, but the this is actually very likely to trigger the very pathway that we want to fade away. So most clients, when they come to the lightening process, I'll take a common symptom. They'll say, I don't want to be tired. I hate being tired. They mean it positively. This isn't something they want to keep living with. But when you turn that around and say, I want to feel energetic, how different is that? So we look at language a lot, and we really ask people to stay away from the language that's triggering the pathways that are already very strong, too strong. I'll do a little test. If I were to say to you, everyone, please, whatever you do not think about a pink elephant juggling 12 purple monkeys. What are you thinking about? The brain doesn't hear the not. Yeah? So if you say, I don't want to feel pain, actually you are strengthening those pain pathways. It's the last thing you want to do, and you mean it positively. But if you say, I want to feel really comfortable, easy and fluid, You're firing up a different part of your brain straight away. Yeah. So, just likes a little more proximity apparently. There's this wonderful thing called neuroplasticity. Anyone heard of it here? Yeah, it's becoming more and more understood, and it's a relatively new concept. I mean, it's a huge breakthrough in the world of modern medicine. The simple version of neuroplasticity is this, that the brain is like a muscle, and the more you work certain pathways, the stronger they get. Well, we know that this can work against us, because when we're stuck in chronic illness, chances are we have, without meaning to at all, developed very, very strong pathways, delivering the symptoms that we don't want, delivering the very thing that we don't want. But once we learn how to recognize when those patterns, those habits, the language, the thoughts, and the beliefs are all contributing to building the wrong neurology, that's when we become really powerful, especially when we have the tools to change that and start building the new neurology of health and flourishing of mind, body, and spirit. So neuroplasticity is a huge breakthrough. Beliefs, they are immensely powerful, far more powerful than most of us know. In the world of medical trials, placebos are seen to be extremely annoying. They get in the way of results. In the world of the lightening process, we love them. We love the theory of how powerful the mind is. It's generally thought that about 35% of people will respond to, say, a drug simply because they believe it has active ingredients in it that are supposed to do X or Y. That's a third of the people will respond. And in fact, for most drugs to go to market, they just have to beat the placebo to be seen to be effective. There are phenomenal placebo studies, including one where there were two groups who both believed they were getting chemotherapy. And in the one group, as you would expect, nearly everybody lost all their body hair. In the other group that only got saline solution, because people thought that they were going to lose all their body hair, and they were getting the chemo, that I can't remember what the percentage is, but I think it's about 30% of that group also lost their entire body hair, simply because they believed. Now, this is very relevant because, as I like to say, those people weren't even trying. They just simply had a belief. So what can happen when we recognize the amazing power between our minds and our bodies, and we have the tools and we're willing to try? If that can happen when we're not even trying. So beliefs are profound underpinnings to health and well-being, and we look at them all the time. So, what is the lightening process? It teaches people how to access that mind-body connection. And by doing so, to change our neurophysiology. By changing our brain, we change our body. So I'll just give you a quick overview of what it is. As I said, it's taken over 3 days, but it really starts at phase 1, which is when people start to get interested in it, start to do their researches, and then decide possibly to apply to do it. All of that is designed to help people already start to have new awarenesses of how this works and how they could become so influential in their lives. And then once people come to the training, having that understanding, they're even more ready to learn the tools that we teach. And then afterwards, we provide follow-up with each person to give them more time to experiment with the tools they have and think about how they might apply them to different things in their lives. So, in summary, some people say to me, well, can you just tell me what the 3 days are about? And I say, well, do you have 3 days? Because it is very interactive and it is quite difficult to sum up. But there's a lot of talk, as you would imagine, about the incredibly powerful mind-body connection. how that works, certain patterns that tend to keep people stuck. And then people learn these very powerful techniques to spot when they are activating pathways that are keeping them stuck, turning on that stress response, and then to learn how to fire up instead and access the healing response by calming everything down and letting the body do what it knows to do, by restoring hope and that beautiful, healing, flourishing state. So one of the things that's worth saying is most people come to the lightening process because they are dealing with some kind of chronic illness. And as I said, there are practitioners all over the world. We've seen thousands of people. But what we also see is that because this is a tool for life, once people have resolved the issue, they now have a tool that they can apply to anything. And it's all relevant because the more people are able to be calm and happy and confident in their life, the more able they are to maintain their wellness and to raise their level of happiness and well-being in the world. So we see a lot of people who are curious about how they can adapt the lightening process to getting a new job, or doing something exciting and different in their life, or managing a difficult person, because it's all relative to how can you create a life in which you can be like the yellow rubber duck, flourishing and resilient. So I'm just finished up by telling you Jason's story. He was actually my very first chronic fatigue client from Vermont, a lovely young man. And he came to me after having had a broken ankle. You can see which one it was. And he was in, as you would understand, a great deal of pain. So I asked him if he had ever broken another bone, hoping he had, because I thought, well, that will give him evidence that his body does know how to recover from a broken bone. What was interesting about Jason's story was he said, oh, yes, I've broken 38 bones. So once I recovered my equanimity after that, and it turned out, by the way, it was 39 because he forgot about a broken nose. I asked him what was different. What was different about this break? Because clearly his body had lots of practice recovering from broken bones. It did it really well until this one. And he said, oh, yes. It was a really stressful time. I'd just broken up, another break, with a girlfriend. And it was very, very stressful at work. So that's the kind of story that we often hear about an illness or an injury or a something that comes at a time or after a time of prolonged stress, which puts that body into a state where it's very, very difficult for it to heal. So Jason did the lightening process and was a great client, and he worked hard. And this is what his feet look like. Come on, Jason's feet. Yeah, Jason's feet look like after he had done the lightening process. And within 2 days of doing the course, he was running around, jumping over tide pools from the bad leg. He was one of those very quick recoverers. And I knew he felt completely better when he told me that he had decided to go back to the motorcycle racing, which had been the cause of all these broken bones after many a fall. And that was actually really significant because it told me how confident he was now in his body, that he could afford to fall off again and break another bone. And he had full faith that his body knew how to recover. So I hope that I've given you enough information that you get a little sense of what this is about. You are more than welcome to ask questions. And what I hope I give you more than anything at all is a sense of hope. You know, I work with people around the country and Canada, and also at Dr. Katinka's clinic, many a trip to Arkansas to work with Dr. Katinka's patients. And there is so much hope for people dealing with chronic illness. So if you take away nothing else today, I hope you will take that in great abundance.